Welcome back everyone. Time to do another, 5-year review of the iPhone 6s. Now I've done 30,000 videos of this specific phone this year, reviews, comparisons, but I've done 3 full comparisons of this thing and 3 full reviews of how this thing has held up this year. But I don't really want to talk about specifically this year, but kind of talk about the long term, how this phone has held up since its first release in 2015. Now what I can tell you is when this phone first came out at that year, that was a pretty big upgrade in my opinion. I said the same thing about the 6s Plus video that I did a couple of days ago, and I think at that time the 6s Plus was a pretty big upgrade going from the iPhone 6 to the 6s or 6 Plus to the 6s Plus. But it's funny because I didn't even realize that until about a year later, so it was still around the same time, but it wasn't at that date because visually they look the same. It's kind of the same thing like with the iPhone 11 Pro to the 10s or vice versa. Like all these phones kind of look the same, but it's not until these visual changes like the flat sides or the triple cameras that people start realizing that, wow, that was a pretty big upgrade even though it may have not been. With the 6s, there were a lot of internal upgrades that really changed the way Apple was moving in the future. With the iPhone 6s, it was the last iPhone with the headphone jack, which was pretty cool, I think. But on top of that, it was also the last iPhone to not have IP certification, so that's also one way to look at it. But there were a lot of, first that were actually really good in this phone, and it was the first one to bring Touch ID 2, which was really cool. It was the first one to bring 4K resolution videos on the back, which was huge. We didn't even see that before on any iPhone until the iPhone 6s. It also was the first iPhone to bring 2 gigabytes of RAM. Before we didn't have that, we only had 1 gigabyte of RAM max, but now we actually had twice that amount, which was really, really impressive. So that in and of itself are several reasons as to why the 6s at that time was pretty important. Then year after year, I feel like it kind of got on the kind of like the back end a little bit, mostly because the software updates that were coming out weren't really the best at that time. I've heard things with like iOS 8, iOS 9, so on and so forth. I think iOS 9 was the one that started off with the iPhone 6s, and it was a very smooth experience. But even then, I remember owning the iPhone 6 or iPhone 6 Plus at the time, and there were a lot of issues with it for sure. It was smoother though, for sure, but there were a lot of issues in the beginning with, I'm sure a lot of people remember. Then iOS 10 came out, iOS 11, iOS 12, and then it was around that iOS 12 timeframe where we were like, we don't know if the iPhone 6s is going to be getting iOS 13 or not, and that actually stemmed from the iPhone SE. We didn't know if that phone was getting iOS 13 or not, and then a ton of different things later, we ended up finding out that that phone was still going to be supported, and that was pretty crazy. So then iOS 13 came out. It's kind of like a rocky road for sure on all of them. But then eventually towards the end of iOS 13, we found out, bro, is this phone getting iOS 14 or not? And then we found out, yes, this phone is still supported. And what I can tell you is right now where this phone is that throughout its history, it's been pretty impressive. But right now, the fact that it even has iOS 14 and it has all these new widgets, has all these new features, and all these cool little things that the newest and latest and greatest iPhones have that are now supported for these, cheaper ones like the iPhone 6s. I think that's a really cool thing, especially when you consider the fact that the iPhone 12 Pro Max that just came out, realistically, every time that phone gets an update, the iPhone 6s will also get an update. And things like that just make me so extremely happy, and I'm super ecstatic about those type of things. So even though this is a older type of phone, it doesn't really seem like it's super outdated because the software is still so current. When I was scrolling through TikTok and I was seeing everybody's widgets and all that stuff, it really made me happy that, there was kind of like some huge trend that was going around with iOS that nobody really talks about, but phones like the iPhone 6s could also be supported in that specific thing as well. And even though it's 5 years old, it's still extremely current because you can still utilize things like those widgets, like those new clock features, like those Siri shortcuts, like those charging sound things. And even though it's not the best phone, even though it has a lot of problems, battery problems, random shutdowns, all that stuff, it did signify a lot of the first at that time. And even if you guys remember a couple years ago with that, Apple battery shutdown thing, I'm pretty sure everyone's heard about it, where it was like planned obsolescence in a way. This was the phone that people found that out by. The iPhone 6s was the phone that Apple was doing that for because of the random battery shutdowns. And I think that's actually a pretty impressive thing. So for sure, nobody really liked it. I didn't like Apple doing it, but it's still pretty weird how this phone was the one that actually, was the catalyst to that specific thing. So I think the iPhone 6s, when we look back, 5-6 years from now, it's going to pretty much be like a defining iPhone for sure. I think it's a pretty important one. And honestly, I said this with the 6s Plus, I think this lineup of iPhones was one of the most important iPhones that ever came out in my opinion. So that really pretty much covers it up. If you guys have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count. So it means so much if you guys can hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.